Chapter 8. So much yet was to happen to Barbie Casaubon. There were two crossed figures on the calendar. One marked the day of her father's death, and the other the day she left Tambourine. The last was a month before. In that month she had got herself organized again. She worked her old shaft up on German Gully, driving it in farther and striking a small pocket of good opal. She started 3 letters to Fascinatin and tore them up. The first said, "I'm at Anne Damuka. It's like I was damned to hell being apart from you. I don't know how much longer I can bear it. You're in my mind all the time. I can't rest. If you knew how much I want you, you'd come on a magic carpet. You wouldn't take a train. Why don't you come up and take me away?" The second was briefer. "I don't want to see you again. I was lucky it wasn't worse for me. I got out just in time. My opinion of you is lower than a snake's belly. If you think you fooled me, you've got another think coming. I saw through you right from the word go." The third was even briefer. "I met a real nice man, and he wants me to marry him. I think I will." People told her she had become quieter and more withdrawn, but she knew she hadn't, not really. She had a lot of thinking to do, and nothing to tell anybody. "I have never felt anything so much as this," she thought, "not even my father's death, and that is like a knife in me still. I am sick with this, though, sick in heart and mind, but it won't do. It will never do. Fretting and fuming will get me nowhere, only make it all so much worse. I have to put it all behind me for my own good and start again." She was determined to make the effort to forget the past, and to welcome the future as an aid and accessory. One day a man got off the mail truck. Through the window she saw him sliding across the sand and stones toward her place. He was stringy and burned black. It was not easy at first glance to recognize him as Billy Lomas. He pushed the door open as if it had been his home always. She faced him before he moved over the threshold. "I'm back," he said. "Are you?" His eyes hardened, softened. "I missed you," he said. "Storekeeper might fix you up for a place and some food." She spoke to him as a stranger. "Don't be crooked on me, Barb. I haven't had it easy." She was unyielding, but her silence encouraged him. "I'm just out of hospital not long. 3 months with 2 broken legs. Horse tossed me. I've been up at the Tenant, working on the road, trying to get a bit of my strength back." "What for?" she said coldly. "All right, Barbie," he gave in. "I made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. You're solid, a man's mate. Be with me again, will you?" "Not me," Barbie thought. "You wanted to live with me. You wanted me to be a woman and a wife to you, only there wasn't to be any ring on your finger. You lie on other lean hips. You can't lie on mine. I'm a blue duck as far as you're concerned. I'm a dud. You threw me out on the dump like an empty tin because you failed. Be with you, not me. Float like thistle down you. If there was another woman. No grudges though. You go your way and I'll go mine. Down there on the rise," she pointed. "That's the storekeeper. He might fix you up." Billy Lomas's face tightened, his nostrils quivered. Then he shrugged and went. Barbie's gaze was unrelenting. He had nice ways, she thought, and there were some good things in him, but they made no difference. A fortnight later a man came to the field in an old Ford truck, piled with gear. He was tall and strong, with a good face and a voice that carried a mile. When she saw him, Barbie thought, "This looks like my husband." She met him in the store, and in the friendly fashion of the field toward strangers, she asked him to her place for tea. She needed to be cautious, but she was impatient of wasting time. He said his name was Joe McAra, and he thanked her with pleasure for her hospitality. She went out in the afternoon and shot a rabbit. When he came, she gave him the choicest piece, baked the color of syrup. After tea, they played cards. It was Barbie's idea. They played for matches. Then Barbie said she was sick of playing for matches. "We'll play for kisses," she said boldly. He nearly fell off the chair. He looked startled. He frowned. Then he laughed and said by hell that would do him. Barbie stood up coldly. She looked at him with scorn. "What do you think I am?" she said, having all the appearance of fuming. "You're just like other men, aren't you? All the same, every damn one of you. Birds of a feather." His face went pale. He put up his hands. He stood up. "Hey, wait a minute. Not so fast. You suggested it. What's the caper? Don't pretend. I wouldn't have dreamt of saying a thing like that. You were ready enough to snap to me up." "Well, of course, any man would be. And thought me cheap." "Hold on," he said. "Have a heart." He was disturbed, prickling to anger. "By Christ," he said, "you're a hellcat and no mistake. Thinking things never in a man's mind." He licked his lips, eyes flashing. "You listen to me. If I want to kiss you, I'll kiss you, and it won't be on the turn of a card. You invited me to your place, and I come respectable with respectable intentions. Now, if you want me to stay, you just stop this playing up and sit down there and deal, and let it be for matches. That'll do me." Barbie sat obediently, eyes cast down. When Joe McAra had gone, she joined her hands behind her back and paced the floor. She felt pleased and gratified. She thought of fascinatin'. "I bet he'd be mad to see this," she thought, "but I'd better not be too smart, not yet. The laugh might be on the other side of my face." Yet she sat down at the table again and looked at the place where Joe McAra sat, and went over him feature by rugged feature, as though he were still sitting there. She saw the palms of his hands, thick with glistening skin, smooth as creek stones, ridged with calluses, deeply lined, a map of toil. There were bushes of golden hair on his knuckles, and hair like blown wheat on the back of his hands. Power started in the butty forearms, went up to the tight biceps, bursting against the khaki sleeves, and spread itself in the shoulders, broad, thick, and slightly rounded. She could tell they were an axeman's shoulders long before he told her he was one. There was no mistaking that smoothed-off effect. His neck was brown and muscular. He had a good, clean, open face that never quite got to being Irish, and a slightly twisted grin that jumped on and jumped off it with ease. There was a scatter of freckles over his nose. His hair was tousled and the color of honeycomb, or, as Barbie liked it, swamp oak, same thing. She summed him up as honest, kind, tough, and good-looking. Not anywhere near as striking as Old Stinker, though. But that didn't matter. She tried to tell herself. Old Stinker was fascinatin'. Joe came every night to play cards and talk. He came from Snowy River way, and he had had a cut at everything, from breaking in horses to working in the city. But he never went nap on the city, he said, and now he had done with it for good. He liked the outback. "Where in the Snowy River country, Joe?" "Jindabyne." Helen Tommy, I was born at Adaminabi. New South, are you? He grinned. No wonder you stand out among this mob. All the best people come from New South. Don't you say anything about the South Aussies. My dad was one, Mum too. What brought you here? Oh, just knocking around. Thought I might pick up a missus. Whose? She said. He laughed a rich roar. No, I had the idea for a long time of trying out the Opal here, and later maybe at Cobber Petty. I worked at the Ridge about 2 years ago. Only black opal country in the world, you know. Ever been there? She told him she hadn't. I did all right. Got enough to buy the old Ford. I thought that'll get me around. How long have you been knocking about? Since I was 16. I'm 32 now. Getting old. Time I anchored. He started cleaning the dirt from under his fingernails with a pocket knife. Funny how your life turns out. I was going to be a fighter, you know. They reckoned I had a future. What happened to it? I gave it away. Why, weren't you any good? I had 40 fights. I didn't get beaten, but I was getting knocked about, and it wasn't making me any money. They kept telling me, wait till you get into the big stuff. Then it'll pay off, they said. This boring you. I'm all ears. Well, they shot me to Sydney to fight a feller called Snowball McIver. He was an aborigine. Snowball didn't know Tuesday from Wednesday, but when he took a swing and hit, neither did you. He was a slugger. He caught me a few beauties, but I didn't have much trouble getting away from his punches. Point is, I hit him with everything but the referee, and I couldn't upend him. It went the whole 12 rounds, and at the end his own mother would have demanded his birth certificate to prove he was her son. Well, I knocked him out all right, but he didn't drop till he got halfway home that night, and then he dropped dead. That was the finish for me. Tried to tell me I didn't do it. Accident. Will of God. Blood clot coming on for years. All that stuff. Point is, he wasn't only on the skids when he met me. He was washed up. He should have been out of the game 40 or 50 fights before. Flesh under his eyes was like blotting paper. His brain was jelly. I didn't want any more of it after that. I could see what could happen to me and to others. So 40 fights, 40 wins, and skidoo out. Barbie looked worried. She said, after a silence, Joe, brawlers and, you know, grass fighters. Could they get these blood clots and things? Sure, if they got hit enough, I suppose. Why? Nothing, just thinking of someone I know, always fighting. Friend? Oh, no, Barbie said. Nothing to do with me at all, really. Heavens, to look at you, a body wouldn't think you'd been a fighter. I mean, no marks anywhere. The good ones don't get hit, he grinned. Still, interested though, he went on. In fact, I'm looking for a sparring partner right now, about your size. I'll get us some supper, Barbie said. She bent over the stove. He looked admiringly at the tight curve of her hips, and the blue moleskin trousers, the neat roundness of her buttocks. She leaned over, her breast hung full and ripe. She looked at him knowingly. He coughed a bit and scratched his head. Hot in here. Think I'll open the door. Don't you do any wood chopping now. She changed the situation. Don't I what? He said. Too right, I do. I follow the shows and any turnout that's going on. Where I can, that is. I couldn't get along without my Plums and Kellys. They earn me a bit of dough. I suppose you're a champion. "Well, I've got a few belts and a bit of tinware, and there's a couple of records kicking around somewhere," he said modestly. When Barbie was certain that Joe McGarrah was the husband for her, she made up her mind to act quickly. "I'm not going to let this one get away," she told herself. "He could have his front teeth out, and only one nostril as long as he's got everything else. And he has, and all his front teeth as well, and 2 nostrils. When he came up that night of the 3rd week, she got out the cards and said to him, point blank, 'Joe, have you got a girl back home?' 'Devil a one,' he grinned. 'You haven't got a wife planted somewhere?' 'Wish I had.' 'True.' 'Spit me death and hope to die. What's all the questions in aid of?' she told him then as she threw the cards on the table that they would play for kisses. 'No bloody fear,' he said. 'I mean it, Joe.' He looked at her for a moment, then, impulsively, he grabbed her hand and pulled her onto his knee. He said thickly, 'You're wild. You're a wild thing. I could chase you like a dog a hare and run you down and put my brand on you. Just being near you stirs the blood in me like nothing else does.' 'I think we'd better play for matches,' Barbie said. 'As my name is Joe McGarrah,' Joe McGarrah said, 'I'm the luckiest bloke in the world tonight.' His luck didn't hold next day. In all that up-and-down country, bare as a board and bleak as a tarpaulin, nothing was so desolate as German Gully, for here was a wilderness of mullock dumps glaring white, a nest of shafts black and oblong, and round like the troglodyte homes of a lost people, and always sun filtering like thin syrup down their walls, sun that struck off the shadow of a man in jet and marked on the ground even the trailing smoke from a cigarette, and always heat, so harsh that knock-off time was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The miners went back to their huts and dugouts, not ready to start again before early morning, and on an evening of moonlight so brilliant that men could read their newspapers by it, no one could be sure that the white mounds and the blue-black shadow on that arid landscape, still as still water, were not a movement of tents and devils. Joe had sunk his shaft to 40 feet, the deepest there. He struck a good patch of opal and hadn't cleaned out the seam before he had 200 pounds worth. The luck of the stranger, they called it on the field. They had seen it before. Men had come there broke, and it was because they were broke that they came. They couldn't get other work to suit them, so they thought they would try their luck on the opal fields. Some of them, of course, had the idea that the stuff grew on trees. They thought they'd make a fortune overnight, but they found it hard work, all of them, and some of them went away as broke as when they arrived. Others hadn't even sunk new shafts. They had gone down duffers, abandoned holes that had yielded nothing, cleaned out the dirt, picked or blasted it a bit farther, and gone away with 400 pounds a week. Some had got that much in 2 days, just struck a rich pocket a few feet in from where the last man left off. For the rest, it was plugging away month after month, making wages, sometimes not even wages, at the generous mercy of the storekeeper, the caretaker of their world and the keeper of their days. That day Barbie said she would pull some dirt for Joe. She stood by the windlass over the narrow hole at the top of the mound. The hole went down like a black chimney. It could have been bottomless. Steps were cut in each side of the shaft wall, and Joe went down straddle fashion, using his feet and elbows. The miners all descended and ascended that way, though sometimes a man was let down on the windlass, one foot in the cable loop, and the other, the free one, keeping his body away from the wall. As Joe's head was swallowed up in the blackness, Barbie gently started to lower the cowhide bucket, and the only sound was that of the creaky windlass handle. All at once came a muffled thud from below, a spate of swearing, and a groan. A vice gripped her heart. "Joe!" There was no answer, and she called again. His voice came up to her, the voice of a man with his teeth clenched, and the vice relaxed. "I'm all right, just my bloody leg. I'm coming down." She went down the same way as he had done. Halfway down, she stopped as he called, "Wait a minute, you'll come a crop or two." She heard him crawling in the dirt. There was a feeble glow from the candle he had lit. It showed her the blunt floor of the shaft. She descended. It would have been insufferably hot and stuffy, only for the windlass. A long tube of calico, a white sausage strung to the windlass, and dropping down to ventilate the hole. A short, semicircular drive, like a chamber, led off from the base of the shaft. The roof was too low for even Barbie to stand up. Crouched like an ape, she went to Joe, sitting with his legs drawn up and hands massaging the left calf. "You've heard of Butterfingers," he said grimly. "Well, take a look at Butterfeet." Missed the step and came down like a ton of bricks. Just as well I was near the bottom. Barbie fell on her knees beside him. "You gave me a start, I thought." "Fell on the damn thing, doubled up. Thought I broke it for a minute." Gingerly he stretched out the leg. "I think it'll be all right, though." She lit another candle. There was the smell of damp, clean dirt. At the base of the wall, all round, was the red clay of the opal bed. The level below, a band of gypsum shining like silken crystal. All a man did was lie down with his shoulder on a bag, take his little pick like the beak of an eagle, and gouge at the red clay, digging a hole all around the base of the wall, taking it in until he could work it no further, then blowing the wall down, clearing away the dirt, and gouging some more, plucking out the water-worn boulders, always peering but without strain, for when the light of lamp or candle struck it, the opal would look at him. There was no supports, no stopping. The hard, copy roof was arced and held like concrete. There was a hammer, an auger, a gouging pick, a box containing sticks of gelinite, caps, and fuses behind Joe. He thrust them back against the wall and turned on his side, raised on one elbow. Barbie still knelt, Japanese fashion, looking at him. "Don't you think we'd better go up?" "In a minute," Joe said. "No hurry." He picked up a handful of dirt and let it dribble through his fingers like sand in a sand glass. "You know, Barbie, I used to think opal was unlucky. Unlucky if you don't find it." He chuckled. "I soon knocked that silly idea out of my system. Glad I did. Lucky at the ridge, lucky here, 300 quid, and you in a few weeks. And nearly killed yourself as well. How's the time?" "About that," he said. He took her hand off her knee and held it warmly. "We are 40 feet down, Barbie, in the middle of millions of years. There's time for you all around this drive up that shaft, through all that strata, millions of years of it. If there was a cave-in, we'd be wrapped up with it forever. Frightened. Not of the cave-in, Barbie said, her eyes twinkling. He laughed. I read a bit in a book once. I learnt it off one. I liked it that much. It goes like this. My name is Silica. I belong to a yesterday back in the beginning of time. It was different then, in the days when this 170 million-year-old field was born. I used to roam on top of the ground and paddle on the great sea that washed down from the Gulf through to the Bight, splitting Australia in halves. I lived when the great monsters lived, the kangaroo big as a house, and the giant lizard that could eat leaves from the tall trees. I died in my cave on the banks of that inland sea, and the sea floor came up, and the water tumbled off it into the Bight and the Gulf, and there was the strip of land that made Australia one whole piece. And there was a sinking in the land as it formed. There was pressure upon the sandstone, and heat among the minerals in the darkness of it, and all of us that died, the fishes, the animals, the birds, the men. We were taken in hand by the chemistry of earth, so that we became as rock. The opal, you see, with the fires in it, that is silica, and it is the cracks in that silica when light hits them that show the color. There is no color in the opal itself. It is only broken up light. I have 1,000 fires in me waiting to shimmer and play in the light, greens, reds, bronzes, orange, blue, for I am opal. Show light to me and find a rainbow in the earth. Leave me in darkness and I am dead. Barbie was thrilled and moved. Joe, that's beautiful, she said. So are you. He pulled her to him, and she fell beside him, cradled in his arms, letting him kiss her, nuzzle her hair and throat, and tell her what he thought of her. In that cavern of glimmering candlelight, deep in the earth, he told her he wanted her for his wife. He told her he would love and keep her every day, just as if tomorrow were to be her last on earth. Barbie wanted to say she would be his wife, but she didn't think she ought to yet, and here, this was not the place to encourage his passion, and a little more wooing wouldn't hurt. Joe, the billy'll be boiled dry, I just remembered. Damn the billy, Joe said, but it was sufficient diversion to let her struggle out of his embrace. Why bring up a thing like the bloody billy at this time? He sounded peeved. It's at times like these, Barbie chuckled, that billies come in handy. Come on. The more I learn about you women, the less I know. He couldn't climb to the top. He had to be wound up. The leg got no better with any kind of treatment, and he thought he had perhaps broken a bone in the foot, the way it swelled. He decided to go into town, Port Augusta. He wrote one letter. Barbie trembled when she got it. She had a fear that it meant goodbye, but it was such that she kept it with her and read bits out of it every day. I think of you every night, darling. Wake up in the night and wonder if you're thinking of me. I can't wait to see you again. I want to look at your hair, the way it blows around in your eyes sometimes, like a veil of reeds. I want to bend over your face. It's the color of a pear, those goldy ones with a bit of red copper in the skin. Your eyes quick and warm as a lantern, and yet sometimes wilder than the eyes of a trapped rabbit. Damned if I can recognize myself, Barbie said with joy. As Joe McCara is my name, I'm the luckiest bloke that ever drew breath. Barbie, I ran into an old mate. Funny Schumacher, the sleeper cutter's cook. And Axman, I told you about, I think. He's got married. Says he and the missus are going for a holiday up Cairns Way. Says he got £250 to spend. Actually, 200 of this amount, he says, belongs to Merrill. That's his wife. But last Friday morning, he says she promised the priest that she'd share all her worldly goods with him. Funny bloke. Anyway, he said there's a chop coming off at Pernambuco in 2 months' time, and he'll be there swinging. I might too, see how things go. The rest of the letter touched on the treatment he was getting for his leg. A foot bone had been broken all right, and went on to sing about her down to the bottom of the 5th page, and all along the margins. When Barbie read, there was a great love in her heart for this man, a love like the surge of waters. She had to be honest with herself, and she didn't think she was anywhere equal to the picture he painted of her. She thought her wrists were too thick, and she felt shame. She looked at her calloused hands like a man's and was disappointed, though she knew the calluses could be made to go with looking after. She didn't like the fine wrinkles like the weave of a basket about her eyes, though they, too, were impermanent. The soles of her feet were leather pads. She smelled of sweat and the dust of the earth, she told herself. She was hard-fleshed, not soft, and giving in the way of a woman, and the way a man wanted. Her breasts were like muscles. She was dismayed and annoyed by this self-criticism, and went back to his letter for reassurance. But she felt she was not worthy of him, and so knew how much she loved him, and how blessed she was. When she opened her handbag to put the letter away, she saw, looking at her reproachfully, a bent 3-penny bit. She snapped the bag shut. She heard a man singing in the night. I take all the girlies, and then, one by one, I give one a daughter, and then one a son. It's work for a man, boys, and work must be done. I'm Omar, the king of the harem. Billy Lomas kicked the door open and swayed there. His shirt was open down to the belly. The hair was wet on his chest, gleaming like dew on cobwebs. He came in, holding the bottle. Barbie stood watching him. She wasn't frightened. She had seen too many men, drunk and sober, just being men. He was the way a man is when he's ready for a woman. She just felt a mild disgust, for he meant nothing to her. He shut the door. On your way, Billy. Think he's better than me, don't you? He was shouting every word. Pitch me off and take him on. Turn around and go back the way you came, she said quietly. She didn't want to do him any harm or fight out a scene. She felt she knew him in drink or out of it. She understood him, but she didn't feel anything for him, not even pity, and she felt pity easily. I'll show you who owns you. He lurched across the floor and tried to put his arms around her. I want you, he said, his eyes wild and scum on his lips. Christ knows how I want you, and I'm going to have you. You can't kick me out like a dog. I was good to you. Go back to your camp, she told him. You don't care a damn what you do to a man, do you? A man could die cutting his throat in front of you, and you wouldn't move a hair. You're hard, hard as bloody nails. Barbie's lips tightened. You better go away now. His face crumpled. Tears flashed in his eyes. You think you can drop me for him just like that? You slut. You're nothing but a slut. She went to the door and pushed it wide open. Go now. He kicked it shut, enraged. He crossed the floor and grabbed her, pinning her arm at the side. I'll take you, he howled. I'll take you if it's the last thing I do. I'll show you you can't treat me like dirt. She didn't struggle, trying to get free. She jerked her head down, smashing it on the bridge of his nose. She knew where it hurt a man to be kicked, and she brought up her knee at the same time. He fell back, gasping in agony. He screwed up his face and rolled on the floor groaning. She turned him on his back, kneeling over him. Billy, you don't tell anybody about this. Joe will kill you if he hears. He tried, but he couldn't speak. She stood away from him, a little afraid now, and feeling something of horror. He looked as if he had been poisoned, she thought. She could not understand why it hurt men so much, how it brought their great bullying strength to nothing, crippling them and made them helpless. She felt the same shock then inside her as when she had seen a great brute of a man tackle her father, and she had cried, terrified that he would be killed because he was only a little man. But in a minute of their locking together, the giant was lying on the ground, just like this man. Kick 'em in the cods, Barbie, her father told her. They get tough, and there's no way else. You do that. I didn't want to do that to you, Billy, she half whispered, repelled. I didn't want to do anything I had to, she said loudly. Don't be any more of a fool. Go away now. She turned her face away. He wasn't groaning anymore. He was shivering and coughing, retching. He was sick. He was getting to his feet, clumsy, reeling. Barbie stood back and watched him. When he was standing, he looked at her crying and shouted bitterly, You scrub turkey, I've had better women than you'll ever know how to be. Women, real women, I've had. Not like you, not grubby, dirty bitches like you. Half man. You should have been a mule skinner. That's what you should have been. He said more, but what he said didn't make any difference to her. She knew he said it because he was hurt. If there was any triumph, she thought it was hers. He went away, blaspheming. She felt suddenly weak with the dissipation of tension. She only hoped that that was the end of it, that there wouldn't be any trouble. Next day she didn't go up to the gully. Joe was due back on the morrow, and she intended to put in the day cooking. Nobody said anything about the previous night's incident. But she knew those people well, and she realized that every one of them knew about it. In the store, with its 3-foot-wide counter, Miss Clary Dick was clerking, and she was a short, dumpy woman with a plodding walk and a pencil stuck in her topping of gray hair. Clary Dick himself was just outside with clippers and a pair of scissors, for he was barber, as well as storekeeper, and boss of the field. The victim was little Mickey Kerrigan, who sat on a box with a bag around his shoulders. Mickey Kerrigan was in his 60s, with a humorous face bitten dark with sun, a face that collapsed into lines of laughter. He had 2 dugouts, one his home and the other called the cathedral because a visiting priest, Tobin, had once celebrated Mass there. It was the place where Mickey said prayers, ate salted peanuts, and meditated, and where Resurrection Jim stayed on his periodic visits. For 40 years he had been an opal miner, White Cliffs, Lightning Ridge, Tintinbar, and among the first at Coober Pedy. For 40 years he had never worked to a whistle. Well-educated, well-spoken, he had formed and was president, secretary, and committee of the Andamuka Progress Association. "I've seen me, Mickey," Clary Dick was saying, with his bit of a spit as though a hair was caught on his lip. Next door to shoving grass in my mouth for the want of a quid and a helping hand. That's why I'll grub-stake anybody till they get on their feet. You've got to give a bloody man a fair go, but you do run the risk of repudiated debts. You do too, but there's only one way to look at it. If a man strikes, he'll fix me up. If he doesn't, well, that's just too bad. I've carried a field of 40 here, month in, month out, many of them, but I've always got what's coming to me, even if they haven't stayed here. If a man can't pay and leaves, I don't yell for the police. In 9 cases out of 10, he'll come back and square the account or send me the money. That's the way I found it anyway. Oh, I skipped a bit here and there. Doesn't matter, said Mickey with a laugh, long as the gaps are even. Talking of keeping people, though, Clary Dick said, spitting 3 times like a repeater rifle. Ever hear of a man called Fatsy Faulkner? God save the king, what? Cried Mickey. He laughed. A bloke that looks like Frankenstein, has feet like draft horses, yarns till the cows come home, and is the biggest bastard in the world for eating. That's Fatsy. To a T, agreed Clary Dick. Well, he was here 5 years ago, just before you come. He had an underground camp over there on One Tree Hill, the one that feller Lomas is in now. In half a day, Fatsy drove in, scooped out a hole like a tomb, sloped the entrance to it, cut a broad ledge out of the wall to sleep on, and called it home. Talk about work. The sod was never done. He sunk more holes on One Tree and the saddle than you could count, but he never even got a trace. Eating, he was never done doing that either, and that's where I come into the picture. I thought I was feeding a regiment. That's Fatsy, all right, laughed Mickey. 2 sheep and a cow, and he was ready to start on the entree. I stuck to him because he was such a toiler. It was only damn bad luck he didn't strike it. Anyway, he put in 3 months and went away, owing me 150 quid. Would you believe that? Just on rations and a bit of kerosene. I think he drunk that too. I give him a tenner the day he left so he could buy his tea when he hit town. I thought the sod was going to eat me, And the missus, before he finished, talk about ravenous. I don't know what they call him fatsy for. There's no fat on him. 18 stone and all of it bone and muscle. Strong, that's not the word for him. I saw him standing in a 6-foot trench once, and a man of 11 stone stood on the shovel, while Fatsy lifted him to the top and tipped him off another time. But I wanted to tell you, he sent me that 150 fiddlies, all choked into a big brown envelope, just addressed to me, Clary Dick, and Damuka, sent from Darwin. It was a year later, but I got it. What a pity a man can't take the damn fool ears off when he's cutting hair and put them back when he's finished. Don't attempt it, Mickey cautioned. But talking of Fatsy, did you ever tell of the time he locked horns with a man named Jack Kipelaw? No, it's news to me. Who's Jack Kipelaw? When he's at home. Wait till I see where you're going with those scissors. I can feel the cold getting in. I'm not looking to be a football, you know. Where's the thing that tells no lies? Clary Dick handed him a looking-glass. Barbie, an uninterested listener to the conversation at mention of Jack Kipelaw's name, pricked up her ears and stood back at the doorway, letting others who had just come get served first. She wanted to hear more. Now, if you'll cut this side to match the other, we'll be right, Mickey Kerrigan said with a chuckle. Well, I was saying about Jack Kipelaw and Fatsy Faulkner. Fatsy Faulkner would take some licking. I'm sure of that. Wait till you hear man. Don't get ahead of my start, Mickey reprimanded. Who's telling this, you or me? You are, Clary Dick spat. Right. Well now, this Jack Kipelaw I'm speaking about. He also goes by the name of Fascinatin', and if you saw him, you wouldn't wonder why. You think Fatsy is strong. So he is, but he can't hold a candle to this other fellow. This man, Fascinatin'. Go on. Tell you what I've seen, Clary. Down at Edithburgh, I saw Fascinatin' walk up a plank onto a ship carrying 200-pound bags of wheat, and a 12-stone man on his back. Halfway up the sloping plank his knees buckled just a bit, but he went on and won his bet. He's been known to lift cars out of bogs bodily and engines out of cars for bets. He's leapt over stools, hurdles, with 12 and 13 stone men on his back. If I didn't hear it from you, Clary Dick said, I wouldn't credit it. But what's this about him coming up against Fatsy Faulkner? Well, they were at a shearing shed together. Some sensation monger got them going. You know Fatsy, he doesn't look for trouble. Fascinatin' doesn't either, though he wouldn't budge 2 inches from it. Well, they got stuck into one another. I wish I could have been there. Like pitted titans, they must have been. It was a kind of wrestle and fight mixed. Fatsy, they reckon, got holds that no man could get out of, but Fascinatin' just broke 'em as if they were candy. He picked up Fatsy and dumped him so hard they thought the poor devil's back was broken, but Fatsy came back and nearly took Fascinatin's head off with a left uppercut. In the end, he was blood from head to hocks, and all over the place like a mad woman's custard. Fatsy, I mean. But that fascinatin's got no mercy. When you're beaten by him, you're well and truly beaten, and you stay beaten. He got a body scissors on Fatsy and puts on the pressure, and the poor devil's gasping for breath, tearing out grass by the roots, squirming, but there's no let up till he's unconscious. Then Fascinatin picks him up and carries him into his bunk. He's in a mess himself. Anyway, it finished up with 'em shaking hands and becoming good mates. I was glad to hear that. The two of 'em together win a war. There should never have been a bout between them in the first place. They both realized that, and the bloke that instigated it got his medicine literally. They forced a bottle of castor oil into him till the poor cuss was leaving his tracks everywhere, so they reckon. Too bloody good for a troublemaker like that, Clary Dick said. Damn terrible what some of them will do to turn decent men against one another. Well, there's your Bob's worth Mickey. Mickey Kerrigan got off the box, removed the bag, and shook himself like a dog. Thanks, Clary. I'll see you again in 3 months. I'm putting it up to 1 and 6 in a fortnight's time, Clary said with a couple of spits. I'll be back the day before then, Mickey joked. I want to miss the price rise. Barbie, served with eggs and flour and other foodstuffs, hurried after Mickey Kerrigan, dipping into his coat pocket for salted peanuts. Mickey, I heard what you said. Jack Kippelaw, do you know him? Well, not personally, Barbie. Why? Nothing, I just thought you might have. She felt disappointed. But you seem to have heard a lot about him, and you've seen him. What do you think of him as a person, I mean? He put a hand under his hat, tilting it, and scratched his head. Barbie, how can I answer that question? I only know the man second-hand, but knowing him second-hand, I'd say this. If he undertook to cross the Simpson Desert crawling on his belly, he'd do it. If you wanted to draw a straight line, you could use him in a ruler. If God wanted him to clean out hell, he'd tackle the job. And I reckon if Lucifer wanted him to dethrone God, he'd have a go at that too, but he'd have to be convinced it was the right thing to do. In other words, he's tough, straight, fearless, and self-willed. Now, that's as I picture him from what I've heard and know. I could be right out. Does it answer your question? Barbie nodded. Yes, but it's the wrong answer, she mumbled. She walked away thoughtfully, mentally disturbed. She felt crotchety with herself for having acted on the impulse to question Mickey Kerrigan. Why did she have to do that? Why didn't she let sleeping dogs lie? And how strange the thought that Mickey should talk about such a subject, and that I should be around to hear him. And anybody would think he was in the pay of Fascinatin', the way he wrapped him up. How could he say such things about a wretch like that? He must be off his bat. But whatever else Mickey Kerrigan was, he was not off his bat, and Barbie knew that, however hard she wanted him to be, so for the sake of making her feel better. He was tough with weakies. Straight, he was about as straight as a corkscrew. Fearless, too stupid in the skull to know any better. Self-willed, pig-headed, more like it. She was annoyed with the turbulence in her. She wanted to look at the situation once again, as objectively as possible, and she tried to do that. She wanted herself to believe that his was just sexual love consummated in a night or a week, and that her love was romantic, purely romantic, the sort where a girl falls overwhelmingly in love with a man, becomes his satellite, knowing the richness of joy and devotion, convinced there will never be another, only to find at the end of, say, 6 weeks that there is, and one so much better, the girl is baffled to know what she saw in the first man in the first place. And so with such a girl, love went on passing from one romance to another. But did she really care? Did what happened really matter? Maybe she felt she had made just a great big tragedy out of it, and was enjoying being the victim, finding comfort in pity for herself and solace in the nobility and bravery of suffering, the dog licking its wounds and looking pathetic. That's all I've been doing, she told herself, taking misery as a tonic. But then, why should I be thinking about him at all in this way? And at this time, I shouldn't even give him a thought. Helen Tommy, she muttered, he's a worrisome thing. I could scratch his eyes out.